I turned 72 last March, and I thought the hardest part of getting older was already behind me. I was wrong. My name is Eleanor. Eleanor Voss. I spent 31 years teaching 4th grade at Pinewood Elementary in Dayton, Ohio. I raised 2 children, mostly alone after my husband Raymond passed in 2019, and I did it without asking anyone for a single thing. That's not something I say with pride, exactly. It's just who I am, who I was raised to be. So when my daughter called me on a Tuesday evening in February and said, "Mom, we have a guest room and it's just sitting empty," I almost said no out of pure instinct. My daughter Celine had married her husband Oliver 6 years before. They lived in a 4-bedroom house in Westerville, a suburb outside Columbus. Nice neighborhood. Good schools, though their kids were still young. I'd visited for holidays, helped with the grandchildren when Celine asked. We had a good relationship, or I thought we did. Raymond's death hit me harder than I let on. We'd been married 43 years. The house in Dayton felt enormous after he was gone. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen I used to cook in every night. And suddenly none of it made sense for just one person. My savings were modest. My teacher's pension covered the basics, but the heating bills that first winter alone were brutal, and the yard was more than I could keep up with by myself. When Celine called, she made it sound simple. She said Oliver was traveling for work most weeks, that she was alone managing the kids, and that having me there would be good for everyone. "You can help with drop-off, Mom, and you won't have to worry about that house anymore. We'll figure out the details. We'll figure out the details. We'll figure out the details." I should have pressed harder on what that meant. I rented out my Dayton house to a young couple, the Hendersons, starting May 1st. $600 a month, which I kept in a separate account. I packed what mattered most, stored the rest in a pod unit, and moved into the guest room in Celine and Oliver's house on a warm Saturday in late April. My grandson Cooper, who was 8 at the time, ran to the car before I even had the door open. My granddaughter Isla, 5 years old and missing a front tooth, held my hand all the way inside. Those first few months were genuinely good. I helped with school pickup. I made dinner 3, sometimes 4 nights a week. I read to Isla every night before bed. Cooper and I had a thing about weekend pancakes. He'd crack the eggs, I'd do the batter, and we'd argue about whether blueberries belonged in pancakes. They don't, for the record. He disagreed passionately. Oliver was around on weekends, but distracted. He worked in logistics and was always on his phone, always half somewhere else. I didn't think much of it. Some men are like that. Celine seemed happy. I was useful, and I was present, and I think there's a version of this where it could have stayed that way for years. But things shift, slowly, and then all at once. The first thing I noticed was the dinner table. In the beginning, we all ate together. By August, Celine and Oliver had started eating in the living room after the kids went to bed, together, without me. It wasn't dramatic. No one said anything. It just happened. One night I came down and the table was only set for 2, and Celine said, "Oh, we thought you already ate," even though I hadn't. I ate in the kitchen that night. Then it was the schedule. Celine started picking the kids up herself, saying her hours had changed. I still made dinner most nights, but Celine began ordering in more often, and sometimes the food would arrive and no one would think to call me down. I started to feel like I was in the way. By October, Oliver had stopped making eye contact with me. Not rudely, more like I'd become furniture, something that was there and therefore invisible. I told myself I was imagining it. Then came the Thursday in November, the week before Thanksgiving, when Celine knocked on my bedroom door after the kids were in bed. She came in and sat at the edge of the chair near the window, the way she used to sit when she was a teenager, and had something hard to say. "Mom," she started, "Oliver and I have been talking." "Okay," I said. "We love having you here. We really do." She paused, "But we've been thinking about the finances, and honestly, it's been harder than we expected this year. Oliver's company restructured and his bonus was cut. And with the mortgage and the kids' activities and everything, Celine," I kept my voice even, What are you asking me? She didn't look at me. She looked at her hands. We think it's fair if you contribute to the household for your share of things, food, utilities, your portion of the mortgage. My portion of the mortgage, I repeated. It's a big house, Mom. You have 2 rooms essentially, the bedroom, and you use the office a lot too. Oliver thinks, we think, $1,800 a month is reasonable. $1,800 a month. For a guest room in my own daughter's house. I didn't say anything for a long moment. I was doing the math. My pension brought in $2,100 a month. The rent from the Dayton house was $600. So total, I had $2,700 coming in. After $1,800 in rent, I'd have $900 left for everything else. My medications, my car insurance, my phone, my own groceries, since apparently I was eating separately now anyway. I need to think about it, I said. Celine nodded and left. She seemed relieved, like the hard part was over. For me, it was just beginning. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark in that guest room and listened to the house settle and tried to understand how I had gotten here. I thought about Raymond, about how he would have handled this. Firmly, without drama, without cruelty. He would have known exactly what to say. I thought about my Dayton house. I thought about the Hendersons, their lease running through April. I thought about the storage pod with my kitchen table inside it, the one Raymond and I bought at an estate sale in 1987. The next morning I called my friend Paulette, who had retired from the county clerk's office and knew more about paperwork and property than almost anyone I'd ever met. I told her what Celine had said. Paulette was quiet for a moment. Eleanor, she said, before you agree to anything, go look at your Dayton mortgage documents. And if you ever signed anything since you moved to Westerville, anything at all, find those papers too. I haven't signed anything, I said. Good. Keep it that way. And get a folder. I got a folder. Thanksgiving came. Celine's brother drove up from Cincinnati with his wife, and Oliver's sister came with her husband. The house was full in that chaotic holiday way. Kids running, football on in the background, the smell of turkey from 7 in the morning. I made my sweet potato casserole, the one Raymond always called the best thing he'd ever eaten. I set it on the counter and went to find a serving spoon. That's when I heard Oliver in the hallway talking to his sister in a low voice. He didn't know I was around the corner. Just dragging it out, he was saying. She's sitting on that Dayton house doing nothing, meanwhile we're carrying everything here. Celine's too soft about it. I had the accountant look at it, and the equity alone is. He stopped. He'd heard something, or sensed it. I walked around the corner holding the serving spoon. I looked at him and I said, I think the rolls are ready. He smiled like nothing had happened. Great, I'll grab them. I smiled back. Inside, my hands had gone cold. Equity. He'd said equity. That evening, after the guests had gone and the kids were in bed, I excused myself early and went to my room. I opened my laptop and pulled up the account I used to manage my Dayton property, the one linked to my original mortgage, which I'd paid off in 2021, paid off completely. Raymond and I had made the final payment together and gone out to dinner to celebrate. I logged into the county auditor's website for Montgomery County. It took me a few minutes to find the right search, and then there it was, a lien, filed in September, against my property at 4412 Birchwood Drive, Dayton, Ohio. A home equity line of credit, opened in my name, for $40,000. I sat very still. Then I checked the signature date. August 14th. I had been in Westerville on August 14th. I had never gone to any bank. I had never signed any papers. My name was on those documents, and I had never touched them. My heart was doing something strange. Not quite pounding, more like it had dropped somewhere lower in my chest and was beating from there, slow and thick. I closed the laptop. I opened it again. I looked at the lien one more time to make sure I hadn't misread it. I hadn't. I picked up my phone and called Paulette. It was almost 11. She answered on the second ring. I found something, I said. Tell me, she said. Tell me, she said. I told her. She was quiet for a beat. Then, Eleanor, don't say a word to Celine. Not tonight, not tomorrow. Are you listening to me? Yes. Monday morning, you call an attorney, real estate attorney, and you call your bank and put a fraud alert on everything in your name. Everything. Okay. And you need to find out if there have been any draws on that line of credit, whether any money has actually been taken out. I hadn't thought of that. I went back to the laptop. $31,000 had been drawn in 2 transactions, one in September, one in October. I wrote that number down on the notepad I kept by the bed, the one I used for grocery lists and phone numbers and notes to myself. I wrote it down in my careful teacher's handwriting and I stared at it for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't done since Raymond died. I cried. Not the quiet kind, the real kind, the kind that takes your breath away. I pressed my face into the pillow so no one would hear me, and I cried until there was nothing left. Then I wiped my face and made a list. That's what teachers do. We make lists. Monday morning I called an attorney. Her name was Sandra Briggs, and she had an office in downtown Columbus that smelled like old coffee and carpet. She was in her early 50s, no nonsense, and she did not look surprised by anything I told her. This isn't uncommon, she said, which was the saddest thing I'd heard in a long time. She explained what I was looking at. Potential forgery of my signature, fraudulent opening of a home equity line of credit, and unlawful drawing of funds using my property as collateral. All of it criminal, not just civil. She told me to file a report with the Dayton Police Department, to contact my bank's fraud department, and to request the original loan documents from the lender to have the signature examined. She also told me not to confront Celine or Oliver yet. Let the documentation do the talking, she said. I nodded. I understood documentation. I had written 31 years' worth of student reports, parent communications, curriculum plans. I understood that paper matters more than words. I spent the next 3 weeks building a file. I requested the loan documents through Sandra. I got copies of my original paid-off mortgage showing I was sole owner of the property, free and clear. I pulled my credit report and found the HELOC had already dinged my credit score. I called the bank that had issued it, a mid-size regional lender, and spoke to their fraud department. They were careful and professional, and they told me they would open an internal investigation. I also quietly started looking at my options for the Dayton house. The Hendersons' lease was up in April. I called them, explained only that I was considering moving back, and asked whether they'd be open to ending the lease early with 2 months' notice. They were kind about it. They said they'd been thinking about buying something anyway. I was still living in that guest room in Westerville, still making dinner sometimes, still reading to Isla at night, still doing the pancake thing with Cooper on Saturdays. I did not let any of this stop. The hardest part was looking at Celine across the breakfast table and not knowing exactly how much she knew. I didn't think she'd done it herself. That wasn't who Celine was. But Oliver had a way of managing her, of framing things. I suspected he told her something that made it sound administrative, logical. Maybe he told her nothing at all. I didn't know yet, and Sandra said not to find out yet. In January, the fraud examiner's report came back. The signature on the HELOC documents was determined to be inconsistent with my known signature samples, showing indicators of tracing or forgery. The bank forwarded the findings to their legal team. Sandra filed a civil suit to void the lien and recover damages. The Dayton police opened a criminal investigation. Oliver got a letter from a detective in mid-January. I was in the kitchen when Celine came in holding the letter. Her face was a color I'd never seen on her before. Not anger, more like the ground had moved under her. "Mom," she said, "what did you do?" I put down the dish towel. "Celine, sit down." Oliver said, "You're trying to..." "Celine." My voice was steady. 31 years of managing a room full of 9-year-olds will do that for you. "Sit down, please." She sat. I had a folder on the kitchen table. I put it there that morning because I knew. I could feel it coming the way you can feel a change in weather before it arrives. I opened the folder. I placed the documents in front of her one at a time. The lien, The signature comparison. The credit draws. The dates. She looked at each one. She was very quiet for a very long time. He told me, she finally said in a voice so small it didn't sound like Celine at all, that you'd agreed to it, that you wanted to help with the house, and you'd signed it over as a loan because you didn't want to just give us money. He said it was your idea. It wasn't my idea, I said. I was never at a bank. I never signed anything. She put her head down on the table, and I thought she might cry. Then she did cry. I watched my daughter cry over her husband's choices, and I felt something I didn't expect to feel, not anger at her, but a heavy, aching sorrow. She hadn't done this. She'd been managed, too. Oliver did not come home that night. He sent Celine a text saying he was sorting things out. She forwarded it to me without a word. The civil case was settled 4 months later. The lien was voided. The lender was required to return the drawn funds. Their internal investigation had found compliance failures on their end as well, which worked in my favor. Oliver faced criminal charges for forgery and fraud. He eventually pled to a lesser charge and received probation and required restitution. The full details were handled between Sandra and the prosecutors. I moved back to Dayton in April. The Hendersons had already moved out. The house needed some attention. A sticky bathroom faucet, a patch of carpet in the hallway that had seen better days. But it was mine. The kitchen still had the mark on the doorframe where Raymond and I had measured Cooper's height the summer he turned 4. I stood in the middle of the living room on the first morning and just listened. The refrigerator humming. A bird somewhere outside. My own breathing. It was the quietest and most peaceful sound I had heard in over a year. Celine and I did not speak for 2 months after I left. She had stayed in the house. She needed to, for the children, for the proceedings. I understood. I didn't make it harder than it had to be. She called in June. I let it ring. Then I called her back the next morning. She said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I know that doesn't cover it." I said, "No, it doesn't, but I'm listening." We talked for an hour and a half. We talked about Oliver, about the things she hadn't let herself see, about the way people who love us can become the people we don't ask questions of because we're afraid of the answers. We talked about Raymond and how much I missed him. We talked about Cooper and Isla, who had asked Celine several times why Grammy wasn't coming for pancakes anymore. That one cracked something open in me that I hadn't expected. Celine suggested a family counselor, someone neutral, with no stake in any of it. I agreed. We've been meeting with her every other week since July. It is slow work. It is sometimes painful work. But I go. Cooper calls me on Sunday nights now. He's gotten very into astronomy, which I know almost nothing about, and he explains things to me with the patience of someone who has decided I am worth educating. Last Sunday, he told me about a star that had died 1,000,000 years ago, but whose light we could still see from Earth. "So we're looking at something that doesn't exist anymore," I said. "But the light is real," he said. "It traveled all that way. It's still real." I've been thinking about that ever since. I'm not going to tell you this story has a clean ending. I'm not going to tell you I forgave everything easily, or that I don't still feel the cold shock of it sometimes when I least expect it. Standing in my own kitchen, looking at the auditor's website I'd pulled up that Thanksgiving night, wondering how I hadn't known sooner. But I will tell you this. I know what I own. I know what's in my name and what isn't. I've talked to an estate planning attorney. I've put things in order. I take nothing for granted now about paper, about signatures, about what figuring out the details actually means. I still make the sweet potato casserole. I made it for myself last Thanksgiving. I sat at my own table, in my own house, with Paulette and her husband and a neighbor I'd reconnected with after too long away, and I ate it while it was still warm. Raymond would have had 3 helpings. There is life on the other side of betrayal. It doesn't look the way you thought it would, and it doesn't feel the way you thought it would, and you carry more than you expected to carry. But you do carry it. You keep going. You put the documents in a folder. You call the attorney. You move back into your own house, and you listen to the refrigerator hum on a quiet April morning. You realize that the home was yours the whole time. You just had to fight to remember it. I've had a long time to sit with what happened, not just the legal part, the paperwork, the hearings, the lien being voided, Oliver's plea, but the part that comes after all of that, the part no one really prepares you for, which is figuring out what it means when someone you love allows something like this to happen in your orbit. I don't think Oliver woke up one day and decided to be the kind of person who forges a 72-year-old woman's signature. I think it happened in smaller steps. A little compromise here. A rationalization there. She has the equity and we need the money, and she'd want to help us if she understood. That's how people talk themselves into things. Slowly. Quietly. In the privacy of their own heads where no one can push back. And I think Celine, my own daughter, the little girl I read to every night, who used to fall asleep with her hand wrapped around my finger, I think she chose, at some point, not to ask certain questions. Not because she was cruel, because she was afraid of what the answers would cost her. That's a different thing from cruelty, but it's not innocence either. There's a word for knowing something is wrong and looking away anyway, and that word has weight. What I've come to believe after all of it is that the choices we make accumulate. They don't disappear. Oliver's choices built toward something inevitable. Not because the universe punishes dishonesty in some mystical way, but because dishonesty requires maintenance. It requires more lies to cover the first ones, more maneuvering, more pressure on the people around you. It collapses under its own weight eventually. It always does. The fraud examiner's report, the bank's compliance failure, the detective's letter, none of that came from nowhere. It came from a chain of decisions that Oliver made, one after another, that couldn't hold. My choices accumulated too. Every year I spent paying off that Dayton house. Every document I kept. Every instinct I followed when Paulette told me to get a folder. I didn't know I was preparing for anything. I just lived carefully, the way my parents raised me to. And that carefulness, boring, unglamorous, totally unremarkable carefulness, is what saved me. I think about the kids sometimes. Cooper with his astronomy and his Sunday phone calls. Isla, who is 7 now and has started losing more teeth. They are not responsible for what their father did. They are children who deserve a mother who is whole and a grandmother who is present. And that's what I'm trying to give them. Not because it's easy, because it's right. Intelligence isn't about knowing everything in advance. I didn't know. I trusted my daughter, and I moved into her home, and I ate at her table and thought we were building something. What intelligence actually is. I'm more convinced of this the older I get, is knowing what to do when you find out you were wrong. It's the folder. It's the phone call to Paulette. It's Sandra Briggs and her office that smelled like old coffee. It's refusing to let shock become paralysis. And the grit part, the getting up and doing it part, that's not heroic. It doesn't feel heroic when you're in it. It just feels like the only option that keeps you upright. You make the list. You make the calls. You drive back to Dayton, and you stand in your living room, and you listen to the refrigerator hum. And you think, this is mine. I kept this. That's enough. That has always been enough.